It's the middle of winter, but I have seeds started in my garden. It's going to be a couple months before they grow, but they're here. I can walk away and leave them to grow. It's a system called winter sowing. Join me as I explain the process. Hi, I'm Gardener Scott, and winter sowing may be just about the easiest way for you to start seeds early. And it doesn't require much, just some kind of container, something to cut open that container, some seeds to put in the soil that you put in the container, and then some tape to close up the container afterwards. And that's it, and I'll show you all the steps. There's a lot of reasons why you should consider doing winter sowing. Now, to define what we're talking about sowing seeds outside during the cold winter months. And one of the primary reasons for doing this is to free up space. Now, those of us that start our seeds indoors often run out of space. We run out of pots, we run out of lights, and there are so many more plants that we want to grow, but we just don't have the space. Well, by starting seeds in a gallon milk jug and then putting this jug outside, we free up the space that we could use for all those other plants that we want to start early. Many of us try to recycle at every opportunity, and winter sowing is a great opportunity to take some of these milk jugs that would otherwise end up in a landfill and instead serve a great purpose in the garden. And they're reusable. So after I sow seeds in them this year, I'll just store the jugs in my shed over the summer, and then next winter reuse them again. And they're going to be good for years to come. There are many different seeds that you can use for this winter sowing method, but I think some plants are ideally suited. Because all of these jugs and the soil and the seeds are going to be outside, exposed to the cold winter conditions, perennial plants and native flowers and ornamental grasses are ideally suited for winter sowing. It's seeds like this dwarf blue indigo. They require cold stratification. Now, cold stratification means that before these seeds germinate, they have to be exposed to cold weather conditions. And these in particular need cold, moist conditions. Whenever I buy these kind of seeds, I'll store them in my refrigerator. And when it comes time to sow them, I'll just take them out of the refrigerator. But my refrigerator is a cold, dry environment. And so to get the moist conditions, I can put these seeds in the moist soil in these jugs, put them outside, and they'll be exposed to the exact same natural conditions that they would be exposed to if they just fell off the flower. These seeds also need scarification. That means the seed shell needs to be damaged so that the seed will germinate. Well, these are going to freeze once they go outside. It's cold in my winters. Well, that freezing and then thawing during the warm days and then freezing again, that's a natural way to scarify the seeds. So I won't need to get a nail file or a nail clipper or a knife to try to damage these seeds. I can sow them using this method, and they will naturally get all of that seed damage that's required for germination. Another great reason to do the winter sowing is that we're letting nature decide when these plants grow. When we try to germinate indoors, we're trying to replicate the conditions that the seed needs. Well, when we just stick them outside, we can walk away and not worry about them at all. And when the days warm up appropriately and the nights are warm enough, they're going to germinate naturally. It's so easy, we don't even really need to worry about it. And then, because they're growing outside, we don't have to worry about hardening them off. If we started these same seeds indoors, we'd have to take them out and in and out and in over a period of a week to harden them off to be ready to grow outside. They're already going to be growing outside from the very beginning. So how exactly do we do this? I know that's what you're waiting for. Well, the concept is extremely simple. We're going to take these containers and cut them. And then we're going to put moist potting soil in the container, sow the seeds, and cover them up. To begin, you need to cut your container. I suggest having a base of about 4 inches, and it depends on the container that you're using. I suggest that you draw a line that gives you some guidance before you cut, because if you're anything like me, it's difficult to cut a straight line. With this line already in place, now I just take a cutter. I'm using a utility knife. You could easily use a knife or scissors, and I'll show you how to do that as well. And so I just start cutting this container. And I could cut all the way around, but I'm going to stop just below the handle so that I have a little hinge. That just helps keep all the pieces together, especially when it comes time to store. And then, following the line as closely as I can, I cut all the way around, and now I've got this little hinge, one piece, and this is what I'll plant in. You may actually find it easier to use scissors, so I'll use a knife to get the hole started. But then I'll take my scissors, put it in the hole, and these are actually much easier for cutting a straight line. Following it all the way around, stopping just below the handle, and we've accomplished the same thing. Now for smaller containers, like these 2-liter soda bottles, I will cut all the way through. And then when it comes time to close up the container, it's very easy to just slide the bottom into the top. You really don't need a hinge for the smaller containers. After you've finished cutting and have the hinge in place, make sure that you think about drainage holes, because this is just like any other pot we would have outside. Now, I just cut a couple slits in the bottom just to give this some extra drainage. You can poke a nail, you can put some slits around the outside. Just make sure you give some place for extra water to go. With the containers cut and ready to go, now we can put some potting soil in the bottom. And as I mentioned earlier, it should be moist potting soil. So when I squeeze it, no water comes out, but it tends to hold its shape. And you can use any good quality bagged potting soil. This is my own mix. It has peat moss, worm castings, compost, and some perlite in it. And you don't need to fill the base all the way full. This is just going to be where the seedlings start growing after those seeds germinate. And we need enough room for those seedlings to grow. This will act as a little mini greenhouse. So during the day, this container will help keep those seeds nice and warm. So they will tend to grow a little bit faster and germinate a little bit earlier than seeds that we've just sown in open ground. You can either stop right now and put the seeds in, or go ahead and get all the containers ready to go. So I'll get a couple of them ready to go, and then we can sow some seeds. With the containers ready to go, now I've got my seed packets ready. This is the dwarf blue indigo that I mentioned earlier. I'm also doing a fragrant false indigo. I have a penstemon, a hairy beard tongue, another penstemon, a showy beard tongue. This is a lance leaf coreopsis. And then I'm also doing Bush's poppy mallow. Sowing seeds in a container that we're going to place outside does not relieve us of knowing the requirements for the seeds when we sow them. So be sure and check the package or look at the online site where you get your seeds, or ask someone at the nursery how to sow the seeds if you have any doubt. If you need to sow them 1/4 inch deep, well then that's what we're going to do here. If they need to be on the surface so they're exposed to light, you do the same thing here. All of these seeds are sown in a very shallow manner. So start by taking one of my jugs, taking a package of seeds. the dwarf blue indigo, and I'll sow these seeds on the surface of this soil. Now, it's also important to look at the spacing, because a very common problem with new gardeners trying this out for the first time is just to sprinkle a whole bunch of seeds in, and you're maybe wasting some of those seeds unnecessarily. For instance, the spacing of this indigo is about 18 inches. That's how far the plants should grow from each other. So I don't need to put 10 seeds in this container. I will put 3 seeds spaced evenly apart, and that's it. And I'm only doing 3 just because I'm not sure about the germination. I want to get at least something growing in here. So I'll do more than 1 seed, but there's no reason to fill this container with seed. And so with the seeds in place, now it's time to cover the seeds. And there's a couple ways you can do this. You can take some more of the potting soil and just lightly spread it on top. But I have a new method that I've been doing recently, and that's to take vermiculite. If you don't have vermiculite, go ahead and cover the seeds with some of the potting soil. If you have vermiculite, I encourage that you cover the surface with the vermiculite. So what's the deal with the vermiculite? Well, this is something relatively new for me. I like watching Gardener's World and a lot of other videos from the United Kingdom. And Monty Don does it this way, as does many experienced growers in the UK. So I thought I would give it a try, and I found it to be quite effective. The seedlings can easily grow through a very light layer of vermiculite. But especially for me, I like it for another reason. These containers will probably dry out over time unless they get steady rainfall through the open top, and you will leave the top off so it stays open. But I don't get a lot of rain in my area during winter and early spring, so I will have to do some supplemental watering to keep these seedlings alive. Well, when you pour water through this opening, the water is going to create a hole wherever it falls, and this vermiculite tends to disperse that water a little more evenly, so I'm not left with a lot of water gushing in and the seeds running around. So that's a primary reason why I do it. If you don't put a lot of soil in, if you have a very thin layer at the bottom, it's more likely to dry out. And so vermiculite can be one of those things to help hold in some of that soil moisture. With this now done, the seeds in place, and they're covered by the vermiculite in my case. If you don't have vermiculite, go ahead and use potting soil. Now it's time to seal up the container, and for that I'll be using duct tape. So I'll just take a nice long strip of the duct tape, and I want to use it to just cover up this seam of where I cut the milk jug. And I'll seal it all the way around. All I'm doing is just holding the top to the bottom. You don't need an airtight seal, and you can use just about any tape. However, do be aware that if you use masking tape, once it's exposed to water and the sun, it's going to be pretty useless. The same with the clear packing tape. I don't find that works very well, because once the dust and the dirt start blowing around and getting on that, it loses all of its stickiness. The blue painter's tape works pretty well, but good old duct tape tends to be what I like the best. I would recommend from this point forward, try to avoid picking this up by the handle. Now, it doesn't weigh a lot, and the duct tape is a pretty good way to hold this all together, but believe me, and I know this from experience, if you get in the habit of carrying these around by the handle, especially once it gets wet inside, don't be surprised if the bottom falls away and then all the soil and your seeds fall out as well. So just to be on the safe side, carry these with 2 hands from this point forward. And now I'm just going to complete the process for all the rest of these containers. I almost forgot to tell you to make sure that you label the container at this point as well. That way, if you're doing a lot of different plants, you'll know which is which. So I'm going to label this as my dwarf blue indigo. Now, you could use a permanent marker for this step, but you may have already discovered that permanent markers are not permanent when they're exposed to sun and water outside. So I'm using a garden marker that is specifically made to handle the sun and the water. And I'll put a link to it below because I think this is what you should use to label all of your plants. I've had a lot of labels that just disappear over time when using the permanent markers. So now let's get to finish this project. So I have all these jugs ready to go. I'm going to finish up with a prairie phlox. Now you may note that there's no vermiculite on this one. This is one of those very small seeds that requires a very, very shallow sowing. So I just pretty much rested the seed on the soil and just disturbed the soil slightly. So I don't have vermiculite in this. And so now I'll just go ahead and identify what the plant is in here. And these are reusable. So next year I can just scratch off the name and write something new, or grow the same things next year in the same containers. I did toy with the idea of just putting a big number on each of these jugs and having a separate list where I identified what was in here based on the number, but I think that's an extra step. But if you like that kind of organization, that's an easy way to reuse these containers as well. Just number them, and each year just update the list with which plants you're starting in each of the numbers. It can be as simple as you want or as many steps as you want. Right now, these are all ready to go outside. And don't be thrown off by the idea that it's called winter sowing. I think it's ideal for winter, growing these type of plants that require the cold stratification. But you can use the same methods and do spring sowing, where you might start tomatoes or squashes or peppers using the same process. For those type of plants, they need warm conditions, no freezing at all. So I would wait until the nights are regularly warm, and then you can do the same thing starting some of those vegetable plants. But for now, let's go ahead and get these outside. And so my winter sowing has begun. It's pretty cold out today, but I've got seeds in the ground. And now I can just go back in the house where it's nice and warm and let these seeds start the germination and growing process. It's completely normal when you bring these out for the first time on a cold day to see condensation on the inside. In fact, you should look for that condensation as these jugs stay outside because you want the soil to stay evenly moist. During freezing conditions like this, you're not going to see the condensation because the soil will actually freeze. But as the days start warming up, as there's more sun, the condensation is a good sign that there's adequate moisture in the soil. And I'll just leave these out open, as much sun as possible. The sun is actually in this direction, so they've got sun during the whole day. I did put them in front of this log because I get some pretty severe north winds, and that'll help keep them from blowing over in some of those winds. But as far as the snow and the rain and all the other natural weather elements, they'll just absorb whatever they can. If they start drying out, if I don't see that condensation, then that's the point when I'll go ahead and start adding the supplemental water. You really don't need to open these up until you see the plants growing, and then you'll open up the top so they don't get too hot during the day. Remember, this is like a mini greenhouse. And when they're the size you want, go ahead and transplant them in the rest of your garden. If you benefited from this video and think you know others who might benefit as well, feel free to share it. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.